Welcome. Tonight I will tell you a story about life in Victorian London. Make yourself comfortable, save this video, and let it guide you gently into a peaceful sleep. Now, let us begin our journey. You open your eyes to a ceiling the color of old tea, stained in irregular blooms where damp has crept through the lath. The plaster is cracked like a dry riverbed, a thin thread of soot tracing each fissure. Your first breath tastes of yesterday's fire, coal and damp wood, and the sour closeness of too many lungs in too little space. The blanket rasping your chin is coarse wool, matted and heavy from the night's moisture. It smells faintly of smoke, old sweat, and a trace of wet dog that never seems to leave. Beneath you, the mattress is a sack of tired straw that has collapsed into two long hollows. You slide toward one automatically, the way thousands of nights have taught it to accept a body. The straw whispers when you shift and pricks through the ticking to touch your skin. Something small, perhaps a beetle, darts in the seam where the bed frame meets the wall. The wall itself is streaked with finger marks where people have steadied themselves getting in and out of bed, oil from hands catching soot and building a shadow of use. A draft lives in this room. It comes through the narrow sash window with its warped glass, dribbles across the floorboards and pools cold around your ankles. The window is strung with a lace of condensation, each bead blackening as it washes a little soot off the panes. Beyond the glass, there is no sunrise, only a jaundiced brightness that belongs to the fog, the pea super that slides between buildings and wraps itself around the city's throat. Chimney pots crouch along the rooftop opposite like a row of blackened bottles, coughing smoke into smoke. Light in here is a grudging thing. A stub of candle leans in a tin holder on the mantel. Around its base are tiers of old wax and a fur of soot. On the hearth, under a crust of grey ash, a clutch of coal still holds a dull red eye. Someone has raked the fire together in the night. Someone always must, or the cost of relighting will be felt in hunger later. Beside the grate, a small black shovel, a rag soaked in old ash for polishing boots when there's nothing else, and a coal scuttle with its lid dented inward like a bruised fruit. The room is scarcely larger than the bed. A narrow chair with a split rush seat leans against the wall, a sock pinned on its back by a knitting needle. A washstand holds a chipped basin with a skin of yesterday's water, rainbowed by the thin film of coal dust that settles on everything. Beside it stands a blue and white pitcher gone grey under a million tiny specks. The water inside is cold enough to numb fingers, faintly metallic on the tongue. A bar of yellow soap sits in a wooden dish, dissolved into a soft corner by the constant damp. Under the washstand hides a covered chamber pot. You're grateful for the cover. Clothes hang from a nail. A shirt that has remembered a better whiteness. Wool trousers with shiny knees. A waistcoat missing a button that has been neatly replaced by a bit of string. The boots below them are stiff with dried mud and the pale crust of street filth that is not quite mud. What the city makes when rain meets manure, ash, and spilled beer. The laces are tacky, as if the streets have followed you indoors and refuse to release their grip. Through the thin partition comes the rhythm of other lives. Above, a floorboard complains as a neighbor shifts from heel to heel getting dressed. the sound of a basin being set down, the splash and gasp of someone braving cold water. In the corridor, the skitter of a child's quick feet, the hissed whisper of a mother shooing them back, the wet bark of an old cough that stirs a sympathetic answer 2 rooms away. Somewhere close by, a kettle lid chatters on a boil. Then the sulky spit of tea leaves hitting water that is not quite hot enough. The air holds the faint sulphur bite of a struck lucifer match. Outside, the city has already shouldered its day. Hooves ring on the cobbles, iron on stone, followed by the rattle and sway of a milk cart. A costermonger's cry cuts the fog like a knife. Strawberries! Fresh today, though you know they will not be fresh, and it may not be strawberries. A newsboy's voice skims under the window. Times. Chronicle. Latest. Each title stretched into a tune to make pennies loosen. Somewhere a factory whistle blows a flat, implacable note that seems to vibrate the glass. You sit up and the room shifts into a fine drift of dust motes that are not dust at all but soot. They sparkle briefly in the grey beam that squeezes around the torn curtain, then settle back onto wood, onto cloth, onto your tongue. Your throat scratches. When you cough, it tastes like a fireplace. Your fingers leave clean trails on the blanket where they brush ash away. The little rag rug at the bedside is damp, and when your feet find it, the cold runs up your shins like water poured from a jug. There is food of a sort. On a shelf, 2 slices of brown bread wrapped in a square of cloth that smells faintly of onions, a heel of yesterday's loaf gone dense as a brick, a stone jar with a whisper of dripping at the bottom if you coax it with a knife, a tin caddy with tea leaves that have been used once and dried on a sheet before being returned for a second life. The room's economy is absolute. Every crumb has a plan. The kettle on the hob is black as a crow, and when you lift it, it leaves a round of clean metal on the soot where it sat. You notice the wallpaper near the mantel, what remains of it. Once a pattern of small red flowers, it now peels in curls. The paste failed in the damp, the flowers dingy with smoke. The skirting board carries a tide line of spills and scrapes from years of boots and buckets. A small mirror with a foxed silvering shows a blurred version of your face, the glass pitted like the surface of an old coin. When you wipe it with the corner of a sleeve, you only move the soot around into a new arrangement. A rent book lies under a cracked saucer on the mantel, its corners dog-eared, numbers marching down the page in ink turned brown with age. The collector will come on Saturday. He always does. The thought has a weight you can feel even now, like a stone in a pocket. It governs how much coal goes on the fire this morning, how many leaves go in the kettle, how long the wash water can be stretched. From the street comes the hiss of someone throwing out a pail, slop pattering into the gutter, then the nervous scuttle of a crossing sweeper boy outside your door, his little broom flicking filth aside to make a passable island through the worst of it, in hope of a penny from a gentleman's boot. His cough is sharp and too old for his small body. He hums between coughs, the tune vibrates the sash and is gone. In the grate the coal eye dims. You kneel and coax the embers with the poker, add 2 small lumps from the scuttle with a care learned in one morning, waste nothing. The new coal catches sulkily, then suddenly, sending up a silky ribbon of smoke that laps the underside of the mantle before joining the room. It smells different from wood smoke, denser, tarry, a flavor that clings to hair and cloth and teeth. People here wear this smell the way your time wears perfume. Every surface tells you what this city is. Not just crowded but close. Not merely cold, but wet in a way that inhabits objects. Not simply dirty, but layered. Soot over damp over wear. And the noise never becomes background. It stacks. Hoofbeats, cries, whistles, the constant minor thunder of wheels on stone. You have not yet touched the latch, and already the day has made a claim on you. On your lungs first, then your skin, then your nerves. The air itself is work. The light itself is tired. The simple business of drawing breath feels like swallowing grit. This is your first lesson, and it arrives before breakfast. You would not last a day in Victorian London because even waking here is labor. The room asks a price, the street asks a price, and the city will keep asking until the candle goes out. The room decides what sort of morning you will have. Coal decides, water decides, and your purse or lack of one decides the rest. You kneel at the grate and feed the stingy ember with 2 lumps from the scuttle, then crumble a twist of yesterday's news beneath them. The ink comes off on your fingers. When the coal takes at last its size, a ribbon of tarry smoke that crawls along the mantle and chooses your lungs as a second chimney. The kettle is black and dented. When you tip a little water into it from the blue and white jug, the metal spits, the handle is too hot, and the lid chatters with a fretful impatience that feels personal. Breakfast is arithmetic. How much coal to bring the kettle nearly, though never quite, to a boil? How many tea leaves to scoop so that the brew remembers tea? How thin to slice the bread so that a heel becomes 3 pieces instead of 2? There is a jar with a thumb's depth of dripping at the bottom. You warm the knife against the kettle and scrape the fat out in curling paints, then smear it thin across the bread so the sheen tricks the eye into believing in plenty. You hold the cup to your face and breathe steam that smells half of tannin and half of coal. The liquid is a brown persuasion rather than a drink. It warms the tongue and tells the belly a story it wants to believe. The room wakes around you as you chew. From the landing comes the scrape of a pail. A woman passes your door with a bundle of washing and the stiff resolve of a general. Somewhere, a match flares and a child coughs so deep you can hear the rattle in the chest. Boots thud down the stair, lace hooks tinking against wood. Over your head, someone sneezes black into a rag and swears softly, then apologizes to no one you can see. The water in the basin is the color of pewter if you stir it. It takes 2 attempts and your breath for courage to splash a little onto your face. The shock is clean and merciless. Your skin prickles as if it would rather leap away altogether. When you dry yourself on the towel, the cloth leaves behind a faint gray that was not there before. Clean is a moving target here. Briefly attained, quickly surrendered. Clothes go on with a weight that feels like the day itself. The shirt is damp in the seams. The wool trousers pull at the knees in memory of yesterday's miles. The boots hold their own weather. cold, with a tacky rim of the street still clinging to the soles. You tie a scarf not for fashion but for soot, a thin armor against the city's mouth. When you lift the latch, the door sticks, the wood swells with the damp night and complains when forced. It opens with a noise like an old hinge groaning about youth. The corridor is a telescope of other lives. A door ajar shows a cot with 2 children asleep in opposite directions under one blanket, the bigger one's foot poking out blue-white at the toes. A pot simmers on a brick over a candle, giving off the resigned smell of oats and water. On the stair, a man with a clay pipe clenched unlit between his teeth touches his cap to you without looking and heads down to a day he already knows too well. Outside, morning is a thickness rather than a brightness. The fog performs its trick of turning distance into rumor. Gas lamps, not fully extinguished, burn pale halos in the syrupy air. The cobbles are slick with a mixture no one names delicately. Yesterday's rain, new horse piss, a scattering of ash, the rind of an orange trodden flat. Crossing sweeper boy has staked a claim at the worst of it, creating a narrow, clean stripe with a broom that has more wire than bristle. His bare hands are red and cracked, and he glances at your pocket with a hope too old for his small face. Street cries pull at you from both sides like shirt cuffs. "Milk! Milk!" sings a woman with a yoke across her shoulders, tin cans swinging. The milk inside is cloudy and thin, and you may suspect the pump had a hand in it. "Hot spiced buns," from a man with a tray and a smile that understands mornings. "Mackerel, fresh as the tide," from a fishwife whose apron bears witness. A newsboy clips his headlines into music. Sensation at the Old Bailey. Whether there is any sensation hardly matters. The tune sells the paper sells the tune. A dustman's cart rolls past, wheels shouting on the stones, the men in glazed hats hoisting bins and slopping ash into the wagon's wooden belly. Ash drifts as it falls, sweet-smelling in a way that is only pleasant to those who have known worse. The cart leaves a delicate grey snow behind that rests on your cuffs and lashes. A rag and bone man follows slow, calling any old iron bones rags with the solemnity of clergy. A woman at a window swaps a bundle for a few pins and a length of ribbon and puts on the ribbon at once, the grey making no argument against her need for a little colour. You make for the pump because your jug is a finite promise and the basin upstairs asks to be emptied. There is already a queue at the pump, women with sleeves rolled, a boy in trousers 2 sizes too large, a girl with a baby on her hip and another at her hem. The iron handle glistens with cold and other people's mornings. When your turn comes, you shoulder the weight of the bucket and feel how the city has arranged its punishment. Water must be carried, and coal must be carried, and laundry must be carried, and every task has stairs in it. As you walk, you pass an open court behind a row of houses. Laundry strung from sill to sill like flags of surrender, shirts stiff with steam, an old woman beating a rug that expels a lifetime of soot in brief clouds. In one corner, a small charcoal stove hisses, and a girl irons collars with a frown of concentration that belongs on an accountant. The smell here is hot soap and wet ash and effort. Breakfast is happening everywhere at once in 100 versions. In a corner shop, A clerk oils the hinges on the shutters and sets loaves into the window, brown, honest, heavy. A man counts out coppers for a halfpenny roll and a slice of cheese he will eat standing in the fog, eyes closed, making a sacrament of it. In the steamy window of a coffee stall, cups clink. The brew is half chicory and half hope, but it is hot, and that is currency. A policeman with a dripping mustache lifts his cup with both hands and nods to the proprietor as if warmth were a favor that must be acknowledged properly. You cross a main street where the fog lifts briefly like a theater curtain. A butcher's hooks show pale crescents through the haze. He wipes the steel on his apron and hangs a rabbit by its hind legs with a brisk tenderness. Next door, a baker's boy shoulders a tray of buns, the glaze dulling as soot settles on it between shop and customer. He stops to tie his shoe and is scolded by a woman with a basket. Time is a price everyone is paying, and he is spending hers. Not far away, in a different London that breathes the same fog more politely, a scullery maid in a great house is up to her elbows in water that was boiled before dawn. She polishes silver with a paste that turns her nails black, dries her hands on linen that will never be hers, and listens to the upstairs bells ring out summons in a cool, coded language. Her breakfast is bread and drippings, the same as yours, but the floor under her is marble, and hers will be eaten standing between one task and the next so that no one notices she ate at all. Above her, a cook tastes porridge with a wooden spoon and pronounces it fit for nursery and staff. Separate bowls, separate rooms, same oats. A footman lights the last of the gas lamps with a pole, though daylight presses at the glass. Habit outruns necessity in this part of town. Back in your street, a sweep trudges past with his rods and brush like a portable skeleton. His face is a uniform charcoal except for the bright whites of his eyes. A small shape follows him, smaller than a broom, shoulders squared as if that could make a spine older. They smell like the inside of everybody's lungs. A match seller holds out a tray of lucifers that leak a faint sulfur into the air. Her voice is hardly a whisper. Matches, sir? Good lights. You see the red bloom on two of her fingers where the paste has burned through skin. She tucks her hands under her shawl when she notices you looking. Somewhere a factory whistle sounds again, longer this time, an iron finger laid on the morning's pulse. The street leans toward the sound. Men's faces turn unthinkingly toward the mouth of the alley that will carry them to the yard. Women's hands move faster over bread. A girl folds her washing and ties the bundle tight. Work is a tide here. Even those who do not go with it feel the pull. You try to eat on the move, your thin bread with dripping, your tin mug of tea gone bitter as it cools. The bread is honest in your hand, and the fat hits the tongue with a certain blunt mercy, but grit finds your teeth. The street sneaks into everything. The tea leaves an aftertaste like nails. Your stomach thanks you anyway, then asks what comes next. You breathe and feel the city inside the breath, cold down the throat, damp in the ribs, a weight behind the eyes that is not sleep. Your fingers are already black at the knuckles, though you have only opened doors and held a cup. The hem of your coat is wet. The fog licks at your hair and makes it one more wick for the air to burn. And yet the morning has a kind of order you can almost love if you ignore how it costs. The sweep's brush rattles in a flue. The milk tin rings against the can when a ladle dips. The coffee stall bell tings once for change. A child laughs and is shushed and laughs again softer. A dog finds something worth investigating in the gutter and is scolded by a constable for his enthusiasm. Gaslight dims by slow degrees as if the lamps are being persuaded, not commanded, to surrender today. You are not persuaded. Your shoulders ache from the bucket, your lungs complain with each long breath, your eyes sting, your hands will not come clean without stealing heat you cannot afford to waste. The city has already asked and asked again, and the clock has not struck 9. This is the second truth, and it arrives with your first steps into the street. You would not last a day in Victorian London because the morning alone is a gauntlet. Of soot you must breathe, of water you must carry, of food you must coax from almost nothing, while the city hums around you, tireless, indifferent, already halfway through its work before you have begun. The street does not so much begin as continue around you, a river that never slept. You step into its current, and it takes you at once, noise at your ears, damp at your skin, grit in your teeth. The fog slides at shin height like a cat, pooling in the gutters, while above it the air tastes of coal and the stale breath of thousands. Nothing here is single. Every sight has a sound stitched to it. Every sound carries a smell. Cobbles underfoot are dark and slick, patched where the city has tried to mend itself. Between stones, runnels carry a slow stew of rainwater, ash, and the leavings of horses. Your boot finds a shallow, and the cold climbs your ankle as if the street has hands. Crossing sweepers keep narrow lanes of relative cleanliness, brooming filth aside with quick jabs. One boy's broom is bound up with wire, the bristles long since gone. He makes a gap just wide enough for a gentleman's stride and looks up at each passing pair of boots with the quick, trained hope of a penny. His knuckles are white with chilblains, one ear is raw where the wind has chewed it. A hansom darts by, 2 wheels, a black fly with a driver perched high at the back like a Beatles rider. Hooves strike sparks from stone. The horse's breath plumes white, the leather tack creaks, and the driver flicks the whip with a sound like paper torn in half. Inside, the passenger is only a silhouette. Hat, shoulder, a gloved hand on a cane. Behind it lumbers a 4-wheeled growler, heavier, its canvas cover beaded with fog. The driver tuts to his horse, an animal the color of old pewter. The street makes room and does not. Wheels shoulder through people, people press between wheels. Watercresses! Fresh and green, a girl sings, tray slung before her, skirts pinned up from the damp. Her shoes are open at the toes. Her ankles are striped where stockings have been darned too many times. A barrow rattles past piled with hot pies under a cloth. Steam leaks sweet and peppery. The seller works a miracle with his cry, turning meat scraps and pastry into comfort with his voice alone. On another corner, a man with a shoulder yoke balances shining cans. Milk! Milk! The liquid clinks inside like glass. You suspect it has seen as much pump water as cow. The signage of the city shouts down from every wall, painted boards of pawnbrokers with their 3 brass balls swinging like captured moons. a barber's striped pole, a chemist's window with blue and red apothecary jars glowing softly through grime, a music hall bill pasted over a patent medicine promise, pasted over a recruitment notice, edges already lifting to show the older promises underneath. "Stick no bills," warns one brick wall wearing 20. A sandwich board man passes, the straps biting grooves into his shoulders. His boards advertise a cure for every ailment and a bootmaker who will outlast any foot. He coughs into the fog and the fog keeps it. You turn into a narrower lane and the world tightens. Windows narrow, stairs steepen, laundry lines web the sky from sill to sill, shirts like pale flags, stays and petticoats dripping. In a doorway, a woman sits shelling peas into a pan, her thumb a machine, a baby asleep against her chest in a sling that once was a man's shirt. A cat threads your ankles and vanishes behind a barrow. The smell here shifts. Coal is still the bass note, but over it comes damp brick, cabbage water, stale beer. In a yard, a man hammers boot heels, each blow dull where the leather drinks it. A grindstone turns under another man's foot. He lifts a knife and lets the wheel put a new light on its edge. Sparks spit into fog and die at once. At the alley mouth, a constable stands, greatcoat, high collar, truncheon at his side, helmet like a polished coal scuttle. He marks everything, who passes, who lingers, who looks too long at which window. His eyes find the boys who watch other people's pockets. A rattle hangs from his belt. He hasn't needed it this morning. Behind him, a blue lamp marks the station, swallowing light rather than giving it. He nods to an older woman pulling a sack on a rope. Rags, bones, any scrap the city is willing to give up. She smiles with two teeth and keeps moving. A dray rolls by from the brewery, the great Shire horses stepping as if the street were built to fit their hooves. Their coats shine even in this light, muscles moving like tides beneath skin. Barrels ring against each other in the cart's belly, heavy with winter. The drayman's whip is mostly language. He sings to his horses and they obey. The Thames is not far. You can feel it before you see it. The air cools, grows raw, takes on a sweetness that is not sweet. At the water's edge, the fog thickens into a wall, and the river becomes audible instead of visible. Slap, slap against the embankment, the dull breath of barges, voices thrown short by damp. Mudlarks pick at the tide line, their hands quick, eyes sharp, a bent nail, a bit of rope, a spoon bowl without its handle, all profit. One boy holds up a white thing and grins before tucking it away. You do not ask if it was once bone for eating or bone for being. Back from the river, the street swells into a market. A roof of glass panes, green with age, scaled with soot, spreads over a maze of stalls. Light collects in dull pools where it leaks through. Here the city crowds closer, but its press feels purposeful. Butcher's hooks hold carcasses like punctuation marks. A man's forearms are crimson to the elbow and steam rises from his skin. He lifts a side of beef as if he were turning a page. A woman barges past with a basket of eels that writhe in their own silver commas. Alive. Fresh. See 'em move, she calls, and they do. A fishmonger crushes ice with a wooden mallet. The flakes take on the smell of fish and become the same as fish. Over in the veg, pyramids of cabbages, muddy potatoes, carrots the color of brick. A boy with a voice too big for his chest shouts, "New taties," and you can see last year's mud still clinging to their eyes. At a spice stall, air lifts briefly and you smell far places, pepper, cinnamon, something like citrus. It is a shock after coal, a window that closes as soon as you breathe it. Nearby, cheese sweats on boards. A man clips a wedge, paper thin, and tucks it into a mouth that still tells you he is missing teeth. An organ grinder appears at the corner, turning a barrel that offers up a tune dressed in tin. The notes come out wobbly from the damp, but a child dances anyway. One boot, one bare foot, hair tied with a strip of ribbon in a circle that becomes a game. An Italian with a tray of plaster saints threads the crowd like a needle, offering small holiness for smaller coins. At the coffee stall on the edge of the market, steam purls from cups. The proprietor's hands are red with heat, his apron a map of spills. A sign says coffee 1D with the 1 chalked over a 2. Prices are a weather of their own here. You're jostled toward the street again. An omnibus lumbers past, 2 horses, a double-decker with open top where men hunch under their hats and women wrap scarves higher over their mouths. Bank, Holborn, Oxford Circus, chants the conductor, a bell in his hand, tickets in his teeth, his fingers going from cold to coins and back again in a dance he does all day. The inside is a cave of wool and damp breath. The outside carries a pelting of soot. Either way, you'll wear the city by noon. Shop fronts parade in a rhythm. Pawnbroker, chandler, used books stacked like brickwork. A printer with a window lettered in gold leaf that has dulled to mustard. A watchmaker with a clock in the window that shows 5 times at once and appears correct in none. A photographer's studio offers daguerreotypes while you wait. A small boy staring out from the sample card with a seriousness bought by the instruction to hold still. In a doorway, a tallow chandler's candles hang in ranks, pale as bones, cheap light that smokes and weeps. The smells faint and jab. Glue works somewhere, a sour animal tang that turns the throat inward. A soap boiler sends up a blessed note of lye and lavender. Then a gust takes the exhaust of a lamp factory, a raw mineral stink, wraps it in horse and returns it. You think of clean air the way someone far from the sea thinks of waves. Up in a better street, the ground changes under your feet. The road is laid with wood blocks here, planed smooth, fit close, a West End kindness. When rain comes, they will swell and squeal under wheels. Today they only make hooves sound hollow. Gas standards are taller, their glass cleaner. Shop girls brush yesterday off the steps with little straw brooms and laugh in twos. Behind tall windows, a milliner's wax head wears a hat like a small ship. Lace sails over an ocean of possible shillings. A gentleman steps from a doorway smelling of bay rum and starch. A boy in livery takes his umbrella like a sword. And then, as if the city were 2 coins leaning upright against one another, a turn carries you back into thinness. The pavement buckles, water stands in shallow pans where the stone has settled, reflecting a sky that cannot be bothered. In a court, a coster's donkey noses a lamppost whose paint has peeled like a sunburn. On a step, a woman scrubs a blood-dark stain from a shirt that is still a shirt because she insists on it. Two boys conspiratorially examine a pocket knife with one blade. They decide to love it anyway. A baker's jingle rings down the alley and 4 heads appear in 4 windows, eyes shining the same way. Danger is not drama here, it is ordinary. Wheels skim elbows, hooves part hair, a drunk weaves and the crowd ripples around him without thinking. A pickpocket's hand is a fish that discovers your pocket has already been emptied by someone cleverer further back. A handbill warns of dreadful outrage in Limehouse and sells a pamphlet that repeats the wording inside. A policeman's stride lifts and drops like a metronome. He sees he does not see. Life here is management of edges. By late morning, the fog in the narrower streets thins to a vapor that you wear in your hair. Soot has settled on your collar in a collar-shaped crescent. Your cuffs report everywhere your hands have been. There is grit between your molars that you did not put there. Your eyes have learned to weep without asking. People around you have not slowed. They pad into the day with a momentum built across years. You are new to this, and it shows at your shoulders and in the way you look for air that is not here. You stop without meaning to, and the city flows around you like water around a stone. A sandwich board brushes your sleeve, a barrow's wheel kisses your heel, a boy slips past with a wink and your coin. Somewhere close, a church bell marks a quarter and is instantly swallowed by hooves, by voices, by the whistle you are beginning to hate. This is the third truth, and the street speaks it without kindness. You would not last a day in Victorian London because simply moving through it is labor, keeping your footing on muck, keeping your breath in coal, keeping your pockets, your temper, your way. The city doesn't offer passage. It extracts a toll from every inch. The whistle that threaded your morning tight now pulls it taut. It is not a single note, but a command, flat, metallic, unarguable, repeated until the street leans toward it like iron to a magnet. Feet answer. Doors click shut. Voices fold into the direction of the sound. You are carried along with a tide of bodies toward a brick mouth with an iron jaw, the factory gate. A clock face, grim under soot, presides above the archway. It is a tyrant that sees only lateness. A man in a stained bowler with a ledger and a stub of pencil watches the stream, tapping marks with the certainty of someone who can turn time into money and money into hunger. A boy rushes past you and catches the gatepost with one hand to spin himself through just as the bell changes its voice. He grins the grin of the barely spared fine. Inside is another weather. Heat pushes at you from a boiler house you do not see. The air smells of hot oil, singed dust, and the back throat bite of coal. Overhead, a shaft as thick as a man's torso runs the length of the room, leather belts dropping from it like the ribs of an enormous animal, each belt looping down to a machine that translates spin into clangor. The floor is a stitched quilt of iron plates and bare boards rubbed glossy with feet. Light enters reluctantly through tall windows furred with grime. Gas jets hiss along the walls to make up the difference, their yellow tongues drawing their own soot above them like halos gone wrong. The first impact is sound. It is everywhere at once. Clack, clack of presses, the chop of shears, the stamp of punches, the ratchet song of gears with teeth too eager. The machines do not so much operate as speak, and their language is hunger. Between them, human voices have learned to live in the cracks, close to the ear, shaped into syllables that end quickly rather than linger wide where the noise will catch them and tear them apart. You start in the metal shop because its heat announces it. A line of stamping presses drops and rises with metronomic cruelty. Iron throats gasping, dies kissing sheet with a dull, killing thud. Men feed the mouth with gloved hands and yank away shapes that will be something else by afternoon. A boy with a trolley of blanks moves between machines with the speed of someone who has learned where wheels will be and when. An overseer's stick, thinned by years of being itself wrapped on the table, taps time that does not exist on any clock. At the far end, the foundry glows like an opened fruit. A cupola murmurs, then roars. When the foreman shakes his head, two men lean into long bars and coax the furnace to give up its metal. The tap hole breaks, and a tongue of iron spills into a waiting ladle, orange so bright it flares white at the core. Sparks spit. A man in a leather apron lifts his head into the heat the way another man might lift his face to rain. Molders stoop over sandboxes on the floor, ramming cope and drag, fingers leaving crisp prints in damp sand when they check edges. Their hands belong to sculptors, their lungs to miners. A fly lands on your cheek and is gone at the first breath. The air is too hot for its plans. When the pour comes, the world holds, with an old man's prayer under its breath, until the ladle empties clean and the runners surge and settle. The men grin, brief and savage, at a thing well done that might have killed them if it felt like it. A door lifts you into a different hell, the print room. The long bed presses gallop, inking rollers sucking and kissing type with a wet whisper before the platen comes down with a thump that you swear you feel in your feet. Compositors stand at cases of type, two trays, upper and lower, the origin of those words, snatching letters with fingers stained a permanent grey. Their eyes tick left to copy, right to case. Their thumbs measure EMs in a composing stick where words become bars of metal. A boy, devil they call him, runs proofs to a table where another man marks them with a blue pencil that finds every sin in a sentence. Strings hang overhead with drying sheets pegged like a forest of paper leaves. The air tastes of lampblack and linseed. When someone shouts, "Mind your fingers," it is less warning than ritual. You step out and your nose leads you, protesting to the tannery's quarter without asking your permission. The smell is not one thing but a stack. Old urine used to soften hides, lime to loosen hair, the clag of wet skin, smoke from fires that refuse to go clean. Bermondsey is a whole education. Men in aprons, the color no cloth should be, stand hip-deep in pits, hauling hides from one bath to the next with poles. A dog stares at a heap of skins as if unsure whether to worship or fear. On a rack, a man scrapes with a curved blade, the sound like a giant cat sharpening its claws. Everything is slick. You think of the bread you ate and do not do it for long. You flee to the bow match factory and discover there is nowhere to flee. Girls, not women yet, not children anymore, sit at long tables with trays of pale splints. The room smells sweetly, wrong sweetly, a ghost of garlic and something chemical that lives in the joints. They dip, shake, set to dry, dip again. One hums above the noise, the others do not lift their heads. A girl smiles, and you see a scarf tied high against her cheek on one side, as if to hold her face together. She keeps working. When a supervisor passes, the smiles fold away like contraband. A sign says no candles, and a candle guttering by the door argues that signs are optimism when poverty is in the room. In a long shed by the river, a rope walk, you discover what straight means. The building could pass for a tunnel, open at each end, air channeling through so steady it feels man-made. Men walk backward, hands busy as strands of hemp are laid and twisted by a traveling carriage that hums down the track. The floor is dusted pale with fiber. The air is warm with the sharp green scent of tar and plant. When a strand snaps, it sings and whips like a live animal. Everyone flinches without thinking and then apologizes to no one in particular that they did. A boy with a tin of tallow oils the palms of men who do not stop to say thanks. He has learned to make his hand the same speed as theirs. There are other rooms. In Spitalfields and Whitechapel, workhouses and respectable shops both multiply the same posture, heads bent, hands fast. In a garment loft, the treadles of sewing machines pump like a field of horses at the plow, belts squeaking, needles pecking. The air is lint. It finds your throat and sets up residence. Women sit in rows, backs a straight line of endurance. A forewoman walks the aisle with a slate and chalk, marking piecework tallies that will be the difference between meat and none. On a stool by the door, a girl ties thread onto cards for a haberdasher's window. White on white, the purity of it a prank the city plays on itself. A man inspects buttonholes with the stern attention of a judge. Somewhere in the back room a baby cries. Someone hushes it with a foot pumping the cradle while the hands never pause their sewing. At the gasworks, the night is still burning when it is noon. Retort houses swallow coal by the cart and return gas by the pipe. Men in blackened clothes drag iron lids aside with tongs long as their bodies, rake out coke that falls in red avalanches and is shoved toward quenching sprays that turn to a hiss and a cloud. The steam is brown. Tar runs like syrup into troughs that shine rainbow under soot. Outside, gasometers lift and lower their crowns like giant lungs. A man with singed eyelashes laughs at something you do not catch. You see his teeth very white, then not at all through the fog inside the shed. You notice how often food happens standing. At what passes for dinner hour, men and women lean on door frames, sit on inverted baskets, perch on the edge of a loading dock. Bread appears from pockets wrapped in paper that yesterday held something else. Cheese is cut with a knife that will later scrape a boiler. Onions are bitten as if they were apples by mouths that barely water anymore. Tin mugs steam with tea that tastes mostly of coal. Woman holds her cup near a press to warm it with exhausted heat. No one lingers. A bell marks the end of mercy, and bodies unbend back into their shapes for work. Rules hang on walls in frames, their glass fogged with the breath of years, fines for lateness, for swearing, for talking, for sitting when standing will do, for wasting material. Beside them, a printed list of rates per dozen, per yard, per gross, and the arithmetic scratches itself behind the eyes of everyone who reads it. Work here is not paid by the hour alone. It is shaved and measured and docked, and the razor is always sharpest on a Friday. In the narrow yard between buildings, you find the only thing like sky. Even here it is a slit. Clotheslines run from nail to nail. A cat walks a fence with a balance that would earn it a wage if the city paid for greys. A man taps a pipe on a brick and empties it into the yard's one plant, which survives because nothing has noticed it yet. Two boys throw a ball of knotted rags against a wall and catch it until a man opens a window and shouts them into the next yard over. The shout is tired, not angry. When you re-enter the machine room, your ears have decided to give up certain registers to survive. The rest fit themselves into the cracks. You see now how the belts shadow the light, and how the oil spatter makes constellations on the walls where lint has stuck. You see how hands in this place take on a geography, callous ridges where rope rides, shiny patches where hot iron has taught respect, white lines where knives once asked too much. Bandages are part of the uniform, their clean beginning gone grey by the end of a shift. By mid-afternoon, your bones feel hollowed and filled with noise. Your throat is a chimney. Your eyes burn with a precise sting that does not water, it merely accuses. You have learned the choreography of getting out of the way, and still you fail. The men and women around you have learned it so well they do not appear to move at all. Work happens around them, through them, with them, as if by arrangement with time. And then you understand what the whistle meant. It was not begin, it was belong. It was agree to be eaten slowly. There is no single cruelty here grand enough to make a story. There is only the sum of small ones, repeated without end. When the afternoon whistle blows, a different note but from the same mouth, you flinch as if struck. No one else does. They set tools where tools belong, smear a last thin ribbon of oil along a shaft, bank a fire, fold a stack to match a line painted on a shelf long ago. There will be more tomorrow. The clock agrees, and the man with the ledger writes its verdict. This is the fourth truth, and it does not whisper. You would not last a day in Victorian London because the factories and workshops are hours that grind. The heat takes your breath. The cold takes it back. The air scours the lungs. The noise erases thought. Here time is not lived but spent, coin by coin, and the city keeps the change. The factory's whistle spits you back into the street and straight into the city's other engine, its stomach. If the workshops grind the hours, the markets grind everything else, hooves, voices, coins, bones. Steam and smoke thin a little as you walk, replaced by a different weather, breath made visible, sweat under shawls, the exhale of fish and meat and people packed close under glass and corrugated roofs. You follow the pull of cries to a covered market where iron ribs make a cathedral for trade. The panes overhead are greened with age and film. Light collects in shallow pools where soot allows it. Inside, the air is a soup of smells that shoulder each other for space. Pepper and damp straw, cabbages cut this morning and onions cut last week, singed fat, spilled beer, and the cold, metallic note that always means blood. Butchers rule one aisle like kings in aprons red to the elbow. Hooks along the beams carry punctuation marks of carcass, sides of beef, mutton with its fat in white waterfalls, strings of sausages coiled like tame snakes. A man wipes his knife on his apron, edge kissing steel with a little sigh before it bites again. He lifts a shoulder with one hand as if he were turning a heavy page and slaps it onto the block. The block itself is a history book, grooves and moons and nicks that hold 100 dinners in their wood. A boy scatters sawdust underfoot. It drinks what must be drunk and turns the floor into rest for hooves that are gone. Next aisle is fish. Cold climbs your boots, the smell gets into your teeth. Eels writhe in tin trays like commas undone. A woman with forearms like oars has a knife that knows one motion. Slit, strip, rinse, again and again, the pale flesh shining like wet china. Haddock lies sullen on shaved ice that was a cake an hour ago. The mallet that made it sweats in the corner. Oysters heap in their own stone boats, shells yawning. A boy wraps them open with a blade worn into a question mark. Winkles! Whelks! Someone sings. A paper twist becomes a cup. A pin becomes a fork. Vinegar becomes a sea you can drink. Turn and you're in veg and fruit, the crown's colonies and English fields stacked together. Pyramids of cabbages, their outer leaves chew-marked by the honest mouths of things that live in dirt. Carrots the color of brick, potatoes with last year's mud tucked into eyes, apples that remember summer. A woman in a bonnet points at each thing with a quiet finger and asks for a price without moving her mouth. The man behind the barrow counts change with the speed of a magician, thumbs black with yesterdays. Chalkboards say 2D, 4D, 6D. Someone's thumb has smudged a 3 into a 5 while you watched and then smiled about it. Spice comes like a door opened on another continent. A sack breathes out cinnamon and pepper at once. Your nose forgets coal for half a second and then remembers it twice. Nutmegs like small stones. A jar with preserved ginger in syrup so bright it seems lit from within. The stall-keeper lets you smell the cork, says the word Ceylon and Java, and makes them taste like sugar just by speaking. On the edge of the market, heat announces the pieman before you see him. The lid comes off his tin and steam rolls into the fog with gravy's accent. Eels, steak and kidney, saveloy. His cry folds hunger into rhythm until money begins to listen. He presses a pie into a customer's hand with a pity that knows its own profit. The man bites and closes his eyes and you think you understand prayer. Nearby, a chestnut brazier rattles as a girl shakes it, shells cracking with a sound like rain on tin. She sells warmth by the dozen, paper cornets becoming hand stoves for a penny. Outside, the street is an unroofed market. Coster's barrows nose end to end, apples, peas pudding, lengths of ribbon, bootlaces, a precarious pyramid of blue and white bowls that have crossed an ocean or a backyard, depending on who is telling you. The barrowman's patter is the city's second language. Lies and truths are salted together until both sell. 2 for the missus, last of today's, straight from, and the place named is always farther than it was. A man with a hand press stamps lengths of tin into little lamps that promise to burn bright on a thimble of oil. They will for a night. A woman with a tray of peppermint humbugs calls sweeties in a voice that once sang lullabies. On a corner, An old soldier sells lengths of bootblack and salutes shoes as if they were generals. Shops make their own theatre behind glass. The Drapers is a landscape of folded cotton hills and flannel valleys, bolts shouldered upright like soldiers in grey. A clerk in his shirt sleeves measures a yard with a tape that has been kissed by 100 little teeth, where women checked him. He snaps it back to his neck and pins a paper to the cloth with a flourish that pretends silk. A girl buys a half yard of blue ribbon, the shade that can make even fog look like a choice. She fingers it before she pays as if to be sure it is real. In the chandlers, candles hang pale and thick, tallow smelling faintly of the animal it was. Cheap light smokes and weeps. The better sort, spermaceti, if the label may be trusted, costs 3 times and burns 3 times brighter, 3 times cleaner. The shopkeeper, who knows everyone's week by how many candles they buy, weighs a pound of soap, brown, honest, and trims a shaving to bring the scale true. The brass weights are stamped with a crown. The scoop is heavier than it looks, and perhaps heavier than it is supposed to be. Next door, the apothecary performs his gentle conjury. Blue and green glass ranks along the shelf. Drawers are labelled in tidy hands. Senna, asafoetida, rhubarb, squills. He mixes powders on a slate, draws them into paper cones with a quiet gravity, nods when a woman whispers, "For me, old man's chest." The shop smells of camphor, spirits, turnings of sweetness and rot. On the counter lies a horn spoon, a pewter measure, a mortar whose pestle has worn a cup into its heart. Books huddle crookedly in the window of a second-hand shop, the leather on the spines rubbed to paleness by fingers that cannot afford new stories. A boy outside lingers over a lurid sheet, penny dreadful, illustrated with the kind of knife that sells itself. He looks up once to be sure no constable is near and goes on reading. Inside, a woman asks the proprietor whether he will take a family Bible as pledge for winter. He weighs the binding with his hands and his face says he will but wishes not to. The pawnbroker's 3 bowls hang above a door like moons that have been handled too much. Inside it is quieter, as if shame is an acoustics. Women stand with parcels in the crook of their elbows, a shawl, a man's coat, a violin. The clerk writes tickets in a tidy hand that turns names into numbers. A boy receives back his father's Sunday boots for Saturday night and promises to return them Monday with a shilling added. Everyone here is in the business of time. The air smells of cloth that has absorbed a dozen lives and will absorb a dozen more. In a lane behind the main street, the menders ply their trade. The tinker hammers the brim of a pot on a stake driven into his trestle. Tap, tap, turn, tap, tap, solder smearing like quicksilver kissed by flame. Cobbler sits cross-legged on his bench, a shoe hooked on his last, thread waxed between fingers, awl poking, stitch pulled, the boot becoming someone's tomorrow. Umbrella ribs flash like caught fish as a man splices a broken spar with a sliver of wood. A knife grinder's stone spins, water drips from a tin above, sparks make brief stars along the gutter before going out. Food happens here standing up, as in the factories, but with more mouth and less calculation. Men lean at the pie stall, at the coffee stall, coffee as the stall defines it, at a ledger of a counter where a woman slides cups along a groove she has polished with service. A wind blows through that smells of orange peel because someone has carved one twist for someone who asked nicely and had an extra halfpenny. A child in a pushcart eats bread and scrape with great seriousness, saving the corner with the heaviest shine for last. Class peeks and stares through the glass. Down the way, under cleaner lamps, a jeweler holds a watch to his ear without touching it, listening with the same attention a priest gives confession. Velvet lies on trays like night sky. The door opens for gloved customers and closes quick against fog. A boy in livery breathes on the handle and buffs it with a corner of his sleeve, just in case the next hand deserves reflection. A milliner's window displays hats that seem more architecture than apparel, feathers like signatures, veils like weather. Two maids with their caps ask the price and smile the smile that means they will make their own with ribbon and wit. Back in your street, a cat's meat man calls cat's meat, and a chain of animals knows the hour. He sells skewers of horseflesh bright as varnish to women who buy for the only creatures in the court who always dine. A tripe shop hangs its honesty in the window in ghost white loops. A boy stares and cannot decide whether to be thrilled or ill. In another window, a printer's devil slaps up a fresh bill, "Music Hall Tonight," over yesterday's sermon notice, the pastebrush furring the paper with hairs of glue. The bill promises laughter for a few pence and a song that will get you home as if on rails. Coins clink an unending accompaniment to voices. Copper and silver smell like blood and breath. Fingers rub the faces by habit, testing for bite marks where bad metal betrays itself. A shopkeeper dips a suspect penny into a little beaker of acid and nods like a judge over a cake. Change is counted onto paper with a pat-pat that says the ceremony matters. Fists close on it with a speed that says the ceremony doesn't. You move through it all and it moves through you. Soot settles in your hair, but now flour dust joins it and spice and the pearl of fish scales that have learned to fly. Your pockets feel lighter without any one theft to blame. Your shoulders carry a basket you do not remember picking up. Your mouth is a museum of flavors, none of them clean. Your boots tack with sugar here and slide with fat there. A cry breaks into song and then into a quarrel and then laughter. You have learned that this is one sentence in this city's grammar. What exhausts you is not the noise alone, but the negotiation. Every price, every footstep, every glance measured and traded. You must learn when to meet a gaze and when to let it spill past you. You must learn which stall has honest scales and which has a scoop with a secret. You must add, subtract, guess, risk, and all of it while remembering to breathe air that is too busy to be air. By the time the market's glass roof has turned from gray to a darker gray, your hands are a ledger of touch, wax from candles, damp from fish, grit from potatoes, a ghost of pepper that makes your eye water when you rub it. Your ears ring with the pitch of a day spent inside other people's hunger and hope. You have bought nothing and it has cost you plenty. This is the fifth truth, and it does not haggle. You would not last a day in Victorian London because even the business of eating, of finding, weighing, paying, demands a strength of nerve and body you do not have to spare. The markets and shops are not scenes, they are tests. Here, appetite is labor, and the city charges for every bite. You leave the market and discover that London is also a trick of the wrist. A single turn of the street and the city changes its voice. The cobbles under your boots give way to wood blocks planed smooth, and suddenly the clatter softens to a hush. The same hooves, but now cushioned, the same wheels, but now whispering. Gas standards are taller here, their glass polished to a clarity that seems like flattery. Windows look back at you with more glass than you have seen all morning, long panes clean enough to turn fog into pearl instead of soup. The buildings grow a little prouder, shouldering each other with cornices and balconies. Doorways are cut deeper, their steps scrubbed until the stone holds a patient shine. Iron area railings guard rectangles of air that drop to kitchen doors below street level. You can smell scullery heat breathing up from those wells, soap and onion and coal. At street height, brass knockers wear their own reflections. The boots that climb these steps were blacked by other hands. Dress changes the air. Women pass in walking gowns that make their own weather, bustles that sway like small tides, hems lifted just enough from the damp by a practiced hand. Their hats carry feathers the length of your forearm, veils like a private fog. Men wear frock coats that know a brush each morning, hats that would not collect soot if soot had manners. Gloves are not for winter here, they are for touching nothing. You cross a square. Plane trees stand like careful punctuation around a garden that belongs to keys, not to feet. In the center, a statue points a stone finger at nowhere in particular. A nursemaid rolls a pram with wheels taller than a child, a white shawl tucked just so over a quiet face. Two small boys chase one another along the paving, their voices muffled as if the air itself has been told to keep it down. Somewhere a piano sounds from an upstairs room, the notes clean as porcelain. A scale is being practiced for a life that will not use it. Shopfronts here are theatre. A perfumer's window floats bottles like captured light, green, amber, rose. When the door opens, the street's coal is briefly pushed back by violets and cologne, and then returns, stubborn. A hosier has dressed an invisible gentleman in his window with socks that are a sermon on discretion. In a grocer's, the hampers are already tied with twine that looks like it costs more than your breakfast. A milliner's heads nod at you with hats like architectural drawings, wire and ribbon and intention. Clubland appears without fanfare. Tall windows with pelmets like eyebrows, men in chairs upholstered with civilization. Through the glass you see newspapers held wide like sails. A waiter's silver tray carried level as a horizon. The pale blue of cigar smoke that has been taught to rise politely. A doorman outside wears a coat with more braid than you knew existed, and the stare of a man who knows who belongs by their silhouette at 50 paces. He does not look at you. He has scented your morning on your sleeves. Behind this quiet, a geography you would not know if you did not look for it, lie the Mews. Turn a corner and you are in a corridor of stables and narrow doors, the backs of houses that pretend not to have backs. Grooms curry horses into a gleam you can hear, straw rustles like a soft applause. Coal hole covers pucker the pavement, round iron mouths through which the fires of rich houses are fed. Laundry flaps above your head on lines strung from window to window, shirts that are never seen in front windows, towels that smell of sun even when there is none. A scullery maid, arms red to the elbow, stops to breathe against a doorframe, then lifts the pail again. A rack of servants' bells hangs in a basement hall, thin hands of brass that twitch when someone upstairs wants a thing. One shivers now, and a girl moves before the sound has finished making itself. You retrace your steps to the front streets and the hush breaks. The wood gives way to harsh stone again. The fog thickens, the glass dirties, the signs shout. A narrowing of buildings and the city folds into itself, the seam between quarter and quarter drawn as abruptly as a line of chalk. You have crossed perhaps 100 yards. You are in another London entirely. Here the pavements buckle. Downpipes drip a rhythm that is not lovely. Windows lean inward from frames that have been asked to do more than wood was meant to do. Courts open behind archways like mouths without teeth, dark, irregular, crowded with a congress of things that never belonged together. Broken chairs, barrels, babies, dogs, and men trying to be invisible. Laundry lines sketch geometry against a sky too close. Shirts hang like surrender flags that no one will accept. Smell arrives first. Cabbage boiled too long, beer turned to vinegar, a medicinal ghost of carbolic from somewhere trying to be clean, and under it all the steady animal of damp. The city has fought cholera here and remembers losing. The pump on the corner has a new handle since the last outbreak. The story about removing it has been told until it shines. Children play around its base anyway, marbles clicking among dropped clay pipes and bottle stoppers. A woman ladles soup from a barrel in a doorway. Her ladle iron, her forearms cords. A line of quiet opens in front of her. Women with shawls pinned against their chests, men without hats, a boy with a baby hooked into the crook of his arm like an old man. Houses divide themselves into rooms which divide themselves into beds which divide themselves into portions of bed. A lodging housekeeper sits at a table in the hall with a slate and a pencil. "4 she asks. "Penny sit up?" A night spent sitting on a bench, 8 to a plank. There is a cheaper thing called a doss. 2 ropes strung and a body slung over them like washing. You look up the stairs and the air grows thicker by the landing. A door opens on a room with too many souls in it. The heat inside is not warmth, it is breath and effort. A ragged school on the corner squeezes letters into children, chalk dust like a blessing. The master's coat shines where elbows have asked too much of it. The blackboard says hope in a hand that is braver than it feels. Next door, a mission woman gives out tracts with a smile that has learned not to look behind you until you are gone. She will see the same faces again tomorrow. She pins a ribbon on a girl and calls it temperance. Down the alley, a gin palace answers with mirrors and light. The gin palace is a cathedral of a different doctrine. Gas jets bloom under engraved glass. The bar back is a wall of bottles arranged like a promise. The floor is sawdust, it drinks what it must. Gin here is called many names, blue ruin among them, and is served in quarterns that could fit in a child's palm and dew. Women come in with shawls pulled low and leave walking easier and then worse. A baby tastes gin on a rag and sleeps like death. A woman counts out sixpence in halfpennies and will tell anyone who listens that the drink remembers warmth when cold does not. A policeman's helmet appears at the door and the room reorganizes itself around him without moving. He pretends to be taller than he is. The gaslight helps. Two lads drift away as if remembering an appointment. Outside, a fight has already finished before he arrives. The man on the ground is helped up by a stranger who will not give his name. The policeman makes a mark in a little book that is mostly full and goes on. Work is here too, in smaller pieces and harder bargains. Costa sharpens a knife on the curb and slices brown pears to show the clean flesh inside. A cheapjack sings the virtues of a tin whistle that will outlast your grandchildren. It will not outlast tomorrow. A woman sits with a sewing project the size of a dinner plate and sells her eyesight to a shirt maker for a penny a dozen seams. A boy with a tray of matches wears the sulfur into his fingers, the skin there always healing and never healed. A man with a monkey and a cap turns a crank and asks the city to decide what music is worth when bread is dear. Windows tell you as much as voices. In the West End, front windows are for being looked at. Here, windows are for letting the damp back out. Curtains are flour sacks cut straight, framed in smoke. Where there are no windows, there are holes, and where there are holes, someone has stuffed them with paper that yesterday told news and today keeps wind. You push through a passage narrow enough that your shoulders remember it. On the other side is a yard hardly bigger than a table. A woman kneels over a tub that has washed 1,000 shirts and will wash 1,000 more. Her hands red, her breath a metronome. A child sleeps on a chair with the seat gone, curved like a question mark, head against arm, mouth open to coal. You pass a workhouse gate. The stone is serious. The board outside says admissions and hours, and something about relief in a tone that had all the comfort argued out of it this morning. Men on the bench outside look at their boots as if argument might begin there. You hear the word spike, and know that it is not a nail but a night and a rule you submit to when there is nothing else. Across the way, a soup kitchen and a line again. A Salvation band may be 2 streets over, brass trying to be light in fog. If you listen, you might catch Onward carried like a shawl for a few bars. Disease writes its name on stone in this quarter. A shilling buys a bottle with a cork and a label that promises cure for cough and caution for nothing. Carbolic has become a season. You smell it in the clinic where a nurse in a cap ties a bandage with the same neatness she uses on her apron. You smell it in the school. You smell it where the dead cart used to run and, because someone remembers, where it does not now. A doctor with a black bag walks with his head down, hat brim dripping. He knows where he is useful and where he is merely expected. Night begins earlier here. The fog thickens quicker in narrow courts. Gaslight turns mean. Upstairs, a fiddler saws at a tune that is 3 songs stretched into one because his bow knows only the one shape. He plays for a room that hums in answer. Gamblers leaning on elbows, mothers bouncing children with a heel, men discussing labor in the voice of weather. Downstairs, a fight over nothing is avoided by a woman placing a hand on a forearm at exactly the right moment. Later, it will not be avoided, and a constable will walk faster but not run. You think of the quiet square you crossed, and you could find your way back in 5 minutes if you wanted. The city is a palimpsest. Rich over poor over older poor over rich again, written and scraped and written. Nothing is far from anything else. The seam moves inside your chest. The knowledge that a bright window and a doss house can see each other through the same fog, that a piano and a gin glass hear the same whistle at the same hour. Your pockets are not lighter now, they are heavier with what you have seen. Your lungs are the same lungs, they have learned 2 languages, the polite breath of the West End and the rough breath of the Rookery. Your eyes have a grit in them that is not coal. It is the arithmetic of unfairness, and it does not blink away. This is the 6th truth, and it lives on both sides of the same street. You would not last a day in Victorian London because the city's wealth and poverty are not neighbours. They are Siamese, sharing a body. One half moves quietly on wood and glass while the other stumbles on broken stone, and each demands a different posture, a different face, a different way of carrying hunger. The toll is not paid once, it is paid twice, and you do not have enough coin. Evening begins as a change in texture rather than color. The sky does not grow rosy, it thickens. The fog, which spent the day draped loosely over cornices and chimneys, drops lower and pushes into streets and mouths. Gas lamps wake one by one, each a small sun behind ground glass, edges haloed by mist. You feel the city inhale, hooves slacken, voices lower, shutters slide, bolts throw, and then exhale into another kind of noise. A lamplighter appears at the end of the street with his ladder and his pole, a silhouette stitched to the glow of the lamp he has just touched. He moves with a certain practiced courtliness, lifting the glass, coaxing the mantle to bloom, closing the pane with a click that sounds like manners. Behind him, the air changes in a visible way, the fog turning from smoke to amber in the lamp's reach. A child follows at a lawful distance, counting under his breath, trying to catch the moment light becomes evening. Workers spill from yards and factories, each carrying a piece of the day on their shoulders, a dusting of flour, a skin of oil, a polish of soot. Their bodies all lean the same way, forward toward home or sideways toward a stall that sells a hot thing in a cold world. A man unknots a scarf with a sigh. The mark it leaves on his neck is the only clean thing about him. A woman tucks stray hair under a kerchief and counts coins in her palm as if they might breed in the warmth of her skin. Boots strike a rhythm along the wooden paving, then change pitch when the street returns to stone. The difference is a map you learn with your feet. Shops close like eyelids. Iron grills roll down with a rattle that echoes inside your teeth. Shutters thump and are barred from within. The last transactions hurry across counters. A half-pound of sugar papered into a blue cone, a candle thrust into a pocket, a spool of thread bitten to break it. A clerk walks a finger's width down the ledger's column and draws a careful line at the day's end. He blows the gas down to a bead, then to nothing, and the reflection of his own face vanishes in the window as if agreed upon. Out in the street, the food of evening announces itself by smell first. Baked potato men pop lids off their tin ovens and a fragrant steam paws at your coat like a friendly dog. "Hot potatoes," they sing, winking through soot. For a penny, you cradle an oval of heat wrapped in waxed paper. The skin crackles under your thumb, the flowery heart scalds your tongue, and for 2 minutes your hands remember summer. A stall of whelks and winkles slops vinegar and salt across cheap porcelain. Pins clink against shells, mouths pucker, cheeks glow. A pieman opens his tin and night becomes gravy. "Saveloy!" "Pie and mash." The cries bounce off wet brick and come back tender. At corners, coffee stalls shed their own homemade constellations. Brass urns sweating, cups hanging like little moons from hooks, a kettle lid that chatters like loose teeth. The coffee is half chicory and half temperament, but it is hot, and hot has a flavor. Men in corduroy drink with both hands around the tin to keep the world where it belongs. A constable with fog beading his moustache blows across the surface as if it were a whistle, nods to the stall keeper, swallows, and becomes enormous again under his helmet. You pass a public house that wears its gaslight like jewelry. Glass panels are etched with vines and trophies. The bar back is a wall of bottles arranged with military precision. The floor is a sea of sawdust, stirred by boots into patterns that might be read if anyone cared to read feet. The landlord polishes a glass that is already clean. His gaze counts heads, orders, tempers. Inside, men stand shoulder to shoulder, elbows out, necks tipped, a brief chorus of "Evening Jim," "Evening," as yar. Women come in with shawls tight, order gin in measures that could tuck into a child's palm, and sip with eyes closed. A baby sleeps in a wicker behind the settle, rocked by the floorboards alone. Outside, the music hall begins its advertisement in lights and the throat of a man who could have been a town crier in another century. Posters, pasted over yesterday's sermon and last week's boxing match, promise a comic who can make you forget your rent, a singer whose song will walk you home, a strong man who can lift the weak up and set it down out of your way. The doorman's whiskers have their own small weather. He tears tickets with an elegance that says nothing here is truly cheap if done right. Inside, warmth and breath and gaslight make a separate climate. The stage is a mouth and the audience pours in. A comic in a check suit throws lines like loaves. The room catches them and breaks them into laughter. A woman in a dress trimmed with apologies sings about a soldier who didn't come back, and hands go to throats, and then to pockets, and coppers patter into a tray for widows you will never meet. A juggler has the night in the air above his hands. He keeps it there a long time and then releases it without drama. You leave with the chorus sewn into you. You will hum it at the pump without meaning to. On a different corner, the Salvation Army's brass answers the music hall with its own hymn. Cornet, drum, a tambourine that asks to be looked at. The captain's coat is too thin for the weather, but his conviction is soundproofed. A woman with eyes that have been wrung dry stands with her back to the gin palace and sings harmony. A child in bare feet beats time with his heels. Coins drop into a plate, some with contempt and some with hope. The plate doesn't argue about motives, only waits. Up the hill, under different lamps, carriages draw up before houses with steps scrubbed to compliance. A footman in livery as precise as printed type leaps down, opens a door as if revealing a jewel, and a woman emerges, gloves, silk, a fan like a private weather system. The house's interior light spills on the fog and makes a small picture everyone can see. Plaster, mirrors, a spill of laughter, crystal obedient to a hand. In the basement of the same house, the servants' hall is a geography of its own. A maid irons a napkin with a hiss that dictates neatness. The cook tastes a sauce with a wooden spoon and pronounces it fit for upstairs and staff alike, with different ladles. A bell jerks and the scullery maid moves before her name is said. Her hands are red to the wrist, her hair is a fringe of steam, and her supper will be taken standing beside the sink that never empties. You wander toward the river, because evening there is a separate story. The fog sits low over the Thames like a cat that will not be moved. Barge lights loom and vanish. A tug hoots, a sound with shoulders. Bells ring from unseen prows. On the water, men shout single words that travel farther than any sentence. The bridges carry their own processions, lovers under one lamp, a clerk counting his steps to measure how far away hunger is, a girl with a tray of toffee that hardens when the wind turns. The river smells like iron and tide and the city's secrets. It will tell none of them. Fleet Street begins to wake as other streets yawn. Newspaper offices fling their windows up. Presses begin to kick like horses in stalls. You can feel the thump in your ribs if you stand close enough. Boys in caps dart like starlings, carrying proofs, carrying gossip, carrying the first pages wet as fish. Compositors bend over cases of type and set tomorrow in lead. Ink lays its black blessing on fingers that will go home disguised. In a doorway, a telegraph clerk chews the end of a pencil and listens to news crackle from wires like distant frying. He writes it short, hands it in, and the city learns to have a story before it has a fact. Back in the poorer courts, a cooking fire squats in a yard and throws its small light bravely at the fog. A pot bubbles with a stew that is mostly water learning to pretend it is beef. Children hover near the base of the wall where warmth collects. Their shadows rise long and heroic up the brick. A man returns with a loaf under his coat and becomes the favorite person in 3 rooms at once. A woman spreads a shawl on a rope and clips it with clothes pegs that have been pegs longer than she has been alive. Someone plays a fiddle upstairs, 3 songs stitched into one because a sharp ear is a luxury. The tune leaks through the floorboards and finds the pot and the shawl and the loaf and makes them belong. Elsewhere in the same quarter, a row breaks out over nothing. Space, a look, a word too loud. It swells and collapses twice, the crowd rising like bread and then sinking back into itself. A constable arrives late enough to be early. He plants his feet and looks as if he will grow there. The row remembers something and drifts apart like fog remembering there is more than one alley. He writes a line in a book, ink small as rain, and goes on. Charwomen go to work when everyone else stops, a night shift of brooms and pails. You pass a church now quiet as a kept promise. A woman with a ring of keys at her belt disappears inside, and the smell that escapes is like old wood and water and brass sullenly clean. A schoolroom glows under gaslight, night class, letters chalked big enough for tired eyes. Hope, the blackboard says in a hand that refuses to be embarrassed. A man in his 30s sounds out a word he means to own before winter ends. Next door, a reading room lends warmth with the newspapers. Men stand to save chairs for those who stagger. By the bridges again, a troop of volunteer firemen jogs past hauling a hand engine that tastes of brass. They disappear into fog before you can see where the flame is. Far off, a bell takes panic and cuts it into pieces you can climb. A minute later, nothing happens where you are, and everything happens somewhere else. And then there are the rooms you cannot enter by invitation but can imagine. A garret where a seamstress finishes a cuff by lamplight while her own cuffs fray. A kitchen where a boy counts a handful of coins twice and then a third time and hopes arithmetic has changed its mind. A cellar where an old man warms his hands over a candle and tells himself it is a fire if the story is good enough. In every one of them, a mouth says a different prayer. For rent, for health, for quiet, for a letter that says a name you have not said out loud in weeks. Your own body reads the hour without asking a clock. The cold has crept up your legs and taken your knees. Your scarf is wet with your breath. Cold taste sits in your throat like a lodging house you cannot leave. The chorus from the music hall has nested near your ear, and the Salvation Band's echo lives on the other side. Between them, the city sings you a tug of war without rope. And all the while, the city's posture does not slacken. It does not lie down. Night is not rest here. It is a second day in a different key. Work continues, in kitchens below steps, in print rooms that hammer midnight into paper, in alleyways where trade speaks softly and counts fast, in police beats marked by the shine of a lantern swinging, in hospital wards where carbolic wears a nurse-like perfume, in beds where 4 souls try to turn at once without waking a 5th. This is the 7th truth, and it arrives under gaslight. You would not last a day in Victorian London because evening does not forgive the morning. It asks for coins you have already spent, warmth when you are cold, patience when you are thin, attention when your eyes burn. The city does not dim, it changes dialect. And you have not yet learned to answer in either tongue without losing yourself a little more. Night does not fall in Victorian London so much as accumulate. It thickens at the level of your throat, seeping under doors, polishing the gaslight into trembling halos. The lamps hum softly, mantles whispering, while their iron posts sweat with condensed fog. Horses move like shadows with breath attached. Cab wheels draw fleeting silver rings on wet stone. The city changes uniforms, shutters become eyelids, alley mouths become opinions, and footsteps tell you more than faces do. The lamplighter is gone. In his place, the beat of boots you learn to recognize, the measured tread of the constable. His bullseye lantern swings, cutting a bright coin from the dark and pinning it to walls and faces and the backs of hands that suddenly look too interested in their own pockets. His whistle rides his vest like a threat and a promise. He does not use it yet. He knows who belongs on this street at this hour. He knows who is practicing belonging. Music halls exhale their last chorus into the fog. A woman emerges laughing, then coughs. A man tips his hat and turns up his collar. A boy sells the next week's bill for a penny and pockets a halfpenny with a look that says he expected less. Across the road, the Salvation Band packs their instruments carefully, brass wrapped in old flannel, and marches off like a rumor. Doors close behind light. Above them, curtains fall into place the way eyelids do when a day has been properly spent. The West End performs night. Carriages queue 3 deep at a portico strung with lamps, horses shaking their harness bells into polite music. A doorman's braid flashes. The fan of a lady ripples like a small private breeze as she lifts her skirts clear of the step. From within, the air that slips out is warm with beeswax, perfume, and string quartet. In the mews behind the same house, a groom rubs down a gelding with a cloth darkening as it goes. The scullery door stands open on steam and clatter. A maid salts the steps against ice with a care that looks like prayer. Turn a corner and the performance changes key. Here the fog sits lower, closer, as if it has opinions about your ankles. Voices are nearer to the ground. Laughter is the kind that finishes with a look over the shoulder. A gin palace burns like a ship under full sail, glass and brass and confidence, its doors breathing warmth and juniper into the street. Inside, mirrors multiply the crowd into something like wealth. Women drink with shawls still up and eyes still down. A baby sleeps in a wicker cradle that rocks to the rhythm of the bar floor. Outside, a man studies the pavement until a constable studies him, and then both decide to be elsewhere. A lodging house door wears its thumbprints as decoration. Inside, air is a substance, not a space. Boiled cabbage, damp wool, coal, breath. A ledger sits on a table with 4 penny beds and penny sit-ups, scratched in a tidy hand. A rope stretches across one room at chest height, the doss. Men and women, boots on, coats on, lean over it and doze, heads nodding like spent candles. In another room, bedsteads press close as teeth. 2 strangers share one mattress because arithmetic says they must. Bedbugs commute openly. The sheet is a map made by other people's nights. A child coughs in a corner without waking. Someone's dream breaks into speech and then stitches itself shut again. You try to sleep and discover that sleep here is a bargain, not a gift. Out in the courts, fires crouch in old grates, throwing light that can barely find the far wall. A pot argues its way to a boil over a handful of coal. A mother measures bread by eye and cuts it by faith. A girl darns a sock at arm's length to make the hole look smaller. Upstairs, a fiddler worries 3 tunes into one, while a neighbor bangs the ceiling with a boot to remind him of clocks neither of them can afford. Elsewhere, the city works while pretending to rest. Bakers knead in rooms that smell like morning while night still stands in the doorway, yeast and coal and a wet wooden table drummed by knuckles. Their forearms shine with flour. Their ovens glow a color you can feel from the alley. Printers on Fleet Street stoke presses that kick like horses. Boys carry proofs between gaslit doorways, their caps wet with ink and fog. Telegraph clerks take dictation from wires that spit news in a code that tastes like sparks. Dockmen unload cargo under flare lamps that shrink and stretch sorrow into silhouettes. A tea chest sighs. A bale of wool lands like a dozing animal. A man's breath comes white and fast and then steadies because ships keep their own time. Hospitals glow a blue-white under gas, windows held ajar with bricks. The air inside is carbolic and effort. Wards speak in whispers, interrupted by the clean click of a nurse's heels and the murmur of a doctor who talks to pulse and fever as if they might be persuaded. A woman sleeps with one hand on her stomach and one on a pamphlet entitled Hints for Mothers. A man wakes from ether to discover that the world is smaller and hurts in a new place. A nurse's voice is the first thing that fits. In the mortuary, the night porter turns a page in a ledger and writes a name no family will spell the same way. Police beats draw figure 8s across parishes. The constable touches each iron gate with his palm like a farmer greeting trees. He knows which door to listen at for a cry that means danger, and which for a cry that means dinner. His lantern interrogates alley mouths, coal holes, the lever of a casement left a finger's breadth open. Sometimes he gives directions to a gentleman who has had too much opera. Sometimes he finds a boy under a stoop with a tray of matches and pockets him into the station for the night, because the cell is warmer than the court. On the river, darkness has body. Barge lights hover and then slide. A tug announces itself with a hoot so low it seems to come from the riverbed. The Thames breathes on you, iron damp, a sweetness that has no innocence. Mudlarks scavenge the exposed banks by lantern. Their hands read the mud in braille, bone, nail, coin, shard. Man lifts a bottle and shakes it by habit. Nothing. He pockets it anyway. The bridge above carries lovers and clerks and a woman with a closed parcel, all going different directions through the same weather. In the rookeries, the city edits itself. Deals are made in voices too low for history, paid in coins that have learned to be quiet. A cutpurse counts his day by feel. A seamstress carries homework by the armful and will carry it back by the eyelet when dawn permits. A grief is shared on a stoop with a bottle that becomes a compass. Due south by the sip, due east by the tear. A mission door opens and a bowl of soup changes the evening's mathematics for 3 people at once. Up the hill a ball has found its stride. Music floats, waltz time, clear as a bell pulled by silk, and young men in white gloves count under their breath, while young women in tulle pretend not to. A chandelier behaves as if it had invented light. In the servants' hall below, a footman polishes a spoon with a square of linen and tells another that he has never seen such shoes. The kitchen hums with the clean violence of service. Cleavers, ladles, the sensible doctrine of a cook who can command a dozen pans with one eyebrow. A scullery maid's hands work under water hot enough to explain her red wrists. When the upstairs bell rings, everyone moves as if pulled by string. Midnight divides the city without moving it. Some doors bolt, others unbolt. A theater's back entrance exhales chorus girls into shawls and watchful men into doorways. A rector's study lamp goes dark. A clerk adds the last column for the week and draws 2 lines under the sum. A watchman on a warehouse roof stamps his feet and drinks a mouthful of tea that has decided to be philosophy. A dog barks at a cat and both win. Rain arrives without choosing sides. In rich streets, it writes silver on black coach paint and makes hats shine. In poor courts, it finds the low part of the floor and lives there until morning. Gutters speak every language at once: English, horse, coal, time. The smell of the city rises another half-inch, and your scarf becomes a wet promise around your throat. You consider lighting a match for company and remember the lodging house sign: no smoking, no lamplight, no talking after 10. Someone talks anyway. The rules understand and forgive by custom. When sleep finally makes an offer, it does not include comfort. On the rope, you learn how to fold your neck so that snoring doesn't set the whole row swinging. On the bed, you learn the diplomacy of elbows. Your ears edit the city into a manageable sentence: drip, breath, distant wheel, closer cough, a boot on a stair, a whistle far off, the river like a lion sleeping. Your lungs scratch at themselves, your eyelids grit and do not argue about it. You dream in gaslight and wake in smoke. This is the 8th truth, and night itself recites it. You would not last a day in Victorian London because the day does not end. It changes shape. Work becomes other work. Hunger becomes other hunger. Danger puts on different boots. Even sleep is rented by the hour and paid for with your back. You are asked to keep paying in darkness with the same coin you spent in light, and you do not have enough left to see dawn as anything but another bill. Dawn in this city is not a trumpet but a rumor. It arrives first as a thinning of black to charcoal, then as a suggestion of yellow pressed behind the grime of the window. Before the light quite decides itself, the sounds begin again in their old order. A kettle lid chattering somewhere down the corridor, a cough that belongs to 3 different lungs, the distant flat command of a factory whistle testing its voice. The rope bed creaks as bodies unhook themselves from sleep like coats taken down from pegs. Coal in the grate remembers a warmer hour and consents to become fire with the bribe of paper and breath. You sit up, and the room you left last night is the room you meet again. Wool blanket rough with damp straw mattress shaped by 1,000 turnings, a basin with a skin of water gone grey with soot. The rent book on the mantel still lies where it lay, corners bent, ink browned. The line for this week is empty, a silence that weighs more than numbers. Your boots are where you left them, stiff with the street's memory. When you pull them on, the cold climbs into your bones as if invited. Outside, the lanes remember their chores with no consultation. A crossing sweeper boy is already at his pitch, brooming a narrow ribbon of passable ground through a puddle that is not simply water. His hands are raw, his ear a red petal gnawed by weather. He grins at a pair of boots he hopes are generous, and then grins anyway when they are not. Milk tins clink. The ladle makes a painted star on the surface of a can that has seen more pump than pasture. A costermonger tunes his cry to the morning's key. Oranges. Fine oranges. And you think of sun and feel the fog negotiate the price of the thought. The city draws you along routes your feet now know without permission. You pass the pump where women queue, the handle polished by 1,000 mornings, the rag and bone man's slow procession behind them, calling for the city's cast-offs with a voice that frays on the edges. In a court, shirts hang from sill to sill like pale flags. A cat walks a fence with a solemnity that suggests office. A mission door opens on a tray of bowls that steam. A lodging house door opens on air so thick with breath and boiled linen that it might be cut with a knife and served to someone who asked for filling. factories collect their people as the river collects boats. The iron mouth yawns, the ledgerman lifts his pencil, the belts take their tautness like a vow. Heat kneads you in one room, cold gnaws you in the next. Noise writes its verdict on your ears in a hand you cannot read but can feel. Hands memorize motions while minds count wages into bread and rent and candles and then into nothing left. A girl lifts splints in a matchworks, scarf tied high over a cheek that does not forgive. A man shakes coke from a furnace into steam that smells of 100 chimneys. Letters become words in a print room where ink takes fingerprints from everyone and gives none back. You break the day not with rest but with food standing upright. A pie scalds your tongue in exchange for heat in your hands. Coffee that has met chicory more often than Arabia persuades your blood to continue. A chestnut in a paper twist cracks like a promise. You learn that appetite here is a math lesson. A penny buys warmth for 5 minutes. 2 pennies buy 20 if you hold the cup properly. Boys in caps run proofs through fog. Bakers slide dawn into ovens so that evening can pretend it knew generosity all along. By noon you find yourself where trade is roofed in iron and glass. Hooks carry the punctuation of dinner. Ice sweats under fish. Cabbages stack into green fortresses. Prices chalk themselves higher while you watch. A thumb smudges a figure from 4 to 5 and calls it weather. A woman folds a half-yard of ribbon into a pocket the way another woman might fold luck. The pawnbroker's 3 brass moons hang heavy above a door where a violin and a shawl and a pair of Sunday boots become numbers for a week. The apothecary rolls powders into little paper comets, writes hints in a hand that hopes, and sends you out with camphor and faith. Then the turn of the wrist that changes London's voice. Wooden paving hushes hooves, windows become mirrors, brass learns its own face. A doorman's braid glitters, a piano practices scales behind a curtain, a square of garden belongs to keys, not feet. The muse behind tells the truth, straw and steam, a rack of bells twitching like nervous birds, laundry strung between lives that do not appear in the front windows. A scullery maid salts steps against ice. The salt is counted like coin. Groom brushes a gelding into a shine you can hear. Somewhere between the front and the back, a kitchen invents supper for 2 worlds with the same hands. And then down again, 100 yards and 100 miles to courts that hold night even at noon. A rope across a room offers sleep to those who can afford to lean. A charity school chalks letters large enough to be read by eyes that worked 12 hours beforehand. The gin palace trades mirrors for tenderness. The mission trades soup for documents. Both ask for something you will feel missing later. Disease takes notes in the damp and sends them to the hospital where Carbolic writes its reply on the air. Evening is the city-changing dialect. Lamps bloom, fog turns amber in their reach. Music halls scoop laughter from tired throats and feed it back as courage. The Salvation Band rubs breath into brass and asks another song of lungs that coughed all day. The river hoots and slides and makes bargains with the dark. Fleet Street's presses kick the day into tomorrow. Bakers' forearms shine with flour under windows held open with bricks. In a parlor under crystal, a waltz behaves as if hunger were a rumor. In a cellar under brick, A woman counts coins into rent and into not quite enough. Night is not a curtain but a second shift. Policemen draw figure eights, lanterns cutting small moons into brick. Dockmen listen to cargo by weight and by sound. In a lodging house, sleep is rented by posture. 4-penny beds, penny sit-ups, the DOS rope like a cruel joke that everyone laughs at because the alternative is not to laugh. Bedbugs vote with their feet. Someone's snore learns not to set the rope swinging. Someone's prayer avoids words and counts breaths instead. If you hold the city still in your mind, you can unthread the day backwards, the lamplighter finishing what the dawn began, the market subtracting color into crates, the factory banking fires into a dull red thought, the street swallowing brooms, a woman pinning a shawl to a rope and calling it dry, a boy folding a newspaper that will be tomorrow's kindling, the river remembering a tide it will keep whether you look or not. But London does not hold still. It is written over while you read it. Posters paste themselves over sermons which pasted themselves over boxing bills, which are themselves only ink and pulp waiting to be soot. What breaks you is not one cruelty but the arithmetic of many small ones repeated. The coal in the air that asks your lungs for a penny every breath. The water carried up every stair until the stairs feel like a tax. The prices that climb a chalkboard like ivy and never climb down. The whistle that turns hours into coins and then takes change in skin. The fog that sits in your hair and in your thoughts. The labor that continues inside speech and inside silence. The nearness of wealth to poverty, two faces on the same skull, speaking two languages that both expect answers. And yet, threaded through the grit, there are mercies that do not make a ledger entry. The chestnut brazier lending heat to hands for a minute and to memory for an hour. A constable pretending a boy under a stoop is a vagrant worth arresting, so the cell can be a bed. A nurse's palm cool on a brow that cannot pay. A baker slipping an extra roll into a paper when no one is looking. A song that walks you home with safer feet than you came on. Lamplighter counting his lamps under his breath like a rosary. A scullery maid blowing on her own tea and smiling at steam as if it were applause meant for her alone. If you listen long enough, the city reveals its lullaby. The close hiss of a gas mantle, the far thump of a press, the river's slow hoot, the kettle's small tantrum, hooves turning to whispers on wood, a bell that marks a quarter and is immediately chewed by fog, a child's cough turned in sleep into a sigh. These are not gentle things, but they are regular. And regular is a kind of kindness when the rest will not be. This is the ninth truth, and it binds all the others. You would not last a day in Victorian London, not because the city hates you, but because it does not notice you. It notices only weight and heat and money and time, and it asks them all at once. Its mercy is real but irregular, its labor is endless and punctual. Those who belong have taught their bodies to answer without asking questions, to breathe coal and call it air, to make a bed from rope and call it sleep, to draw a line under the day and begin the next one in the same motion. So let the day finish its circle without you. Set the boot you have unlaced beside its pair. Let the rent book turn its face down. Leave the basin to settle into its quiet metal. The fog outside will thicken and thin without your help. The lamplighter knows his route. The river keeps its own watch. Somewhere a bakery is kneading morning. Somewhere a press is printing it. Somewhere a nurse is watching it arrive in a girl's fever breaking. You do not have to go with them. Lie back on the straw that remembers other shoulders. Pull the scratchy wool to your chin. Listen for the kettle lid 2 rooms away, the hoof on wood, the distant whistle promising to be cruel in the same way tomorrow. Let the city keep its books and its bells. Let its breath be a tide that moves past your door. You are not part of its arithmetic tonight. Close your eyes. Coal will go on being coal, fog, fog, hunger, hunger, courage, courage. The lamp will lower to a pearl and then to nothing. The river will say its piece. The bed will accept you as if you were one of the shapes it was made for. Breathe slower. Let the gas mantle's whisper become the only word you need. Let the city's great noise flatten into a steady, far-off hum. Sleep now. The day will begin again without your help. And when it does, you will be somewhere the air costs nothing to breathe.